Oh, hello. Can you guys hear me? Oh, Ishita.
Hello, am I audible?
Hi. Yes. We're just waiting for people to join. Um, you're
Oh,
audible.
great. Perfect. Now, this is a bit of a glitch. We don't have electricity here,
All right.
and I'm just trying to figure out if my computer would actually last long enough for us to share the presentation and such.
Oh, you can share the presentation to us by email so we can screen share it.
Yeah, no, because I'm just trying to search, or it might just turn into just a lecture. Uh, because we also don't get internet, and the very weak network that I have right now, because once we have no electricity in the fort, then we have no electricity in our mobile boosters either. Awful timing.
probably check if it's convenient for you to share with us as Vishal said.
Yes,
So we can
I'm
operate
actually
PPT from here and
because
we can,
I've
hmm,
I've given my phone's hotspot to the laptop, but it won't even
mhm.
upload. Like that's the problem.
Okay.
Because you remember Diya Burj in the uh, fort complex? So Diya Burj
Mm-hmm.
has Airtel and Vodafone antennas, and because there's no electricity and the generator would supply electricity to the antennas, so the signal is very spotty.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
that's why collateral damage of being at a fort.
How is the weather over there? It's been
The
on the
weather,
news about Jaipur.
oh no, it's in fact it's perfectly fine now. We haven't even
It's
had
fine.
any drizzling so far. So
Okay. Mm-hmm.
in fact, I think it saved the worst for when you were here because it hasn't been that bad since.
Okay. Over
Just a
here, the
moment.
situation was worse.
Oh yes, I read Gujarat is not doing very well with the rains.
Yeah. Not
I
kind of.
I'll just put my video off for a second. Maybe it will give me some bandwidth.
Yes.
Right? Struggling to send this off. Because also my computer is on its last leg. Is we've gotten the generator running, but entire fort needs electricity. With the rains, it's been really bad because every time it rains, some part of the wiring gets disrupted. So we have a fault,
Mm-hmm.
and we've told JVBNL to come in and sort those things out for us. How have the other lectures been so far? I really wanted to attend those, but it just
The
wasn't possible.
yesterday's session was very insightful, like Seema Huja's lecture and Garima
I'm
ji's
sure.
lecture also. Like both
I'm
gave
sure.
a really good insights into the Jaipur city and certain events that had its connection with Jaipur, all family, properties, everything. So I think
That's
this
great.
session would be very helpful to the students to shape up their thematic studies further.
Really hope I can do justice to it because I just keep talking about so many things with regards to Jaigarh and such that because now what I'm doing is I'm actually removing the video of the water system in place and replacing it with pictures because that's the reason the PPT doesn't load.
Mm-hmm. Right. Videos take a lot of space.
Yeah,
Good afternoon, Chandni. How are you?
very well. How are you?
I'm very well.
I'm so sorry I couldn't see you when you were here,
No,
but
no, cross paths.
kudos to you. The students have developed very interesting research thematics. I mean, both Jigna and I are very excited. If they can do this, the exhibition in December would be so wonderful.
Yes, looking forward to how this all pans out.
Just replacing a couple of things in the presentation so that I can actually send it out because it doesn't get loaded and I have only my phone's internet. We don't have electricity in the fort today. There's a fault. Kairavi, or anybody, if they can just think. Would it be, I know uh, when I say this, but is it a possibility that I can share the presentation with my notes and everything later on, and we can actually talk about things schematically while this thing, because this won't go, and also the laptop's at 2% battery right now.
Okay.
And in fact,
Okay.
even the phone is at 33, but I'm really hoping that we'll be able to do this. Because there are tons of videos also that I wish to share of the water management system in its functioning, because I don't think the students were able to shoot those, but we have those for them. And there are a few of Nahargarh as well, which I've recorded in these intervening days so that they can understand it better. But so I have a flow of how we want to talk about it, basically talking about how Jaigarh has, grown, developed, and its interconnectedness with what is now Nahargarh. So, do we think that that's a possibility?
Yeah, if the presentation is not getting loaded, we could, but then simultaneously I can share like the Google Earth or any maps if I can find online as you can narrate it.
All right. If you can look on Google Earth and you can just look at Jaigarh, you'd be able to.
All right. Good. Just
it would be the. Let me share my screen with my phone also. Is it possible? Goodness, I really should have just sent the presentation earlier. It's on lost. Because then let's see if the tab works.
should I screen share or the Google Earth?
Yes, if you can, because I don't.
Right. Oh, then just start recording the meeting and we can start.
So, Dr. Chandni, before we start with the discussion and the presentation, I would just, because this is also broadcasted on YouTube, I would like to just give a very brief introduction on the intention of why we have conducted this lectures and a bit introduction about yourself. So, I'll start with that. Will that be all right?
Please do.
So good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce the second session of our MAHR Expert Lecture Series, which is the part of Master's Studio titled Private Property, Public Property, the Complicated Nature of Architectural Heritage in India, which is led by Riyaz Tayyibji and assisted by me. It is a part of the program Architectural History and Research at CEPT University, and it is in collaboration with CEPT-CHC, that is Center for Heritage Conservation, and also in collaboration with JP City, that is Jaigarh Public Charitable Trust. While our studio focuses on Jaigarh Fort, our exploration also goes beyond its walls to delve into broader historical and cultural context of the region. Our students are currently exploring themes such as cartographic history of Jaipur, the genealogy of the royal family, military and political landscapes, the economics of security, and the intricate relationship between the fort and its natural environment. Today, it is the second day of our expert lecture series. The format of the series is like we have invited seven distinguished speakers who would be discussing several topics over the next 4 days. And the structure of this session is like 45 minutes presentation by the speakers, followed by Q&A session. So our first speaker is Dr. Chandni Chowdhary, who is an architect with a PhD in strategic planning for heritage-based development. With extensive experience in built heritage and UNESCO World Heritage Site Management, she has played a pivotal role as a heritage conservation and consultant at the Heritage Cell of Jaipur Municipal Corporation. Her work includes leading the development of the Special Area Heritage Plan for Jaipur, which is now a model for historic urban co-development across South Asia. Dr. Chaudhary is also a published author and an active contributor to both national and international conferences. She has also served as a visiting faculty member for undergraduate and postgraduate architectural studios. Please join in with welcoming Dr. Chaudhary. Thank you.
Thank you, Kairavi. That was really flattering, some of the lines from you. However, we're all defeated by technology today, and I am at the historic Jaigarh Fort right now, and unfortunately, we don't have power backup. So you'll have to bear with me. I had a couple of slides prepared for you because I wanted you to be able to see how Jaigarh is in terms of both its water harvesting and management systems, as well as the sister fort of Dhundhar, the Naharkar fort. But nevertheless, I'll dive right into what I am supposed to be talking about today. The theme of this particular studio delves very interestingly into the interrelationship of how different forts within the city of Jaipur, which is incidentally UNESCO World Heritage Site, correspond with each other and how they differ in terms of their management and their manifestations as cultural heritage sites when they are privately held, as is the Jaigarh Fort, vis-a-vis how it behaves when they're publicly held or managed and administered by the government. The examples of which would be the Amer Palace, again World Heritage Site, and the Nahargarh Fort, which is about 5 kilometers from the Jaigarh Fort. Now, it so happens I'm going to start with what Jaigarh is today and what it was at one point of time. So, enthroned in history, it's a garrison fort that was founded in circa 11th century. It is believed that the foundation stones of the earliest parts of Jaigarh would have been laid around 1036 AD. Now, we don't exactly know the year, but we know what reign it corresponds to, and that gives us a very brief period of about 4 years. And that's the reason why we chalk down on the number 1036 AD. The Kal Bhairav temple within Jaigarh, which is in the northern sector of the entire fort, is considered to be the oldest part. And subsequently, the southern part of the fort, which is where the cannon now lies, and a little fortress that is called Vijaygarhi, are the oldest parts of Jaigarh. We do have a map dated back to the late 15th or the early 16th century, which gives us an idea that the first 3 courts of the fort existed at that point of time, and none of the palace complexes did. But they have marked in that particular map the water channels, not masonry constructed as we see them today, but water channels that were formulated by different valleys that would have brought in water to certain lower lying areas that is now encompassed by the fort and the fortification walls around it. And there were certain other pockets which would have been natural harvesting areas for rainwater from all the surrounding hills. So this was a site that is believed to have been identified by, say, Man Singh I, but again, contrary to beliefs that it was constructed and hence named Jaigarh by Savai Jai Singh II in the 18th century, it is, so to speak, common sense that the palace below at Amer, that was situated in a valley, would not have been left unprotected by any fort on the hills that were surrounding it, because it would be unprudent for a Rajput ruler who would make it his capital to leave his palace, which was incidentally all his populace, his treasures, his family, unprotected. And so comes Jaigarh into the picture, perched high up on a hill, about 400 feet higher in altitude than the Amer valley of Amer that it protected. Now, it's renowned for its impregnable walls and this, very stoic and robust imagery that it conveys when you're driving past the prettier, more delicate and more articulated palace of Amer to its northeastern side. And over the years, when there have been surveys, the Rajputana survey of 1884-85 is a personal favorite of mine, which details the city of Jaipur, it details Amer and the fort of Nahargarh with quite detail, but it only marks the boundaries of Jaigarh. Now, this also conveys to you that this very formidable edifice was the linchpin of the military might of the Kachawas, the ruling family here. And it establishes the prominence amongst almost concurrently with their very long-lasting legacy and their initial ascent into a seat of power in the region. And for nearly 9 centuries, up to the middle of the 20th century, Jaigarh held sway as the primary military bastion of the Kachawas. It has borne witness to countless years of changing of power. It has borne witness to the reigns of different very remarkable kings and the enduring heritage of these kings. It's almost never been documented before. In fact, it's only after the year 1982 when the Jaigarh Public Charitable Trust was formulated under the very able leadership of visionary, a former ruler of this particular dynasty, Mahavir Chakrasawai Bhavani Singh Ji of Jaipur, that the trust was formulated. And the trust then took over the management of the Jaigarh Fort. And in July 1983, that's only 41 years ago, that the trust then decided that the fort would be opened up to the public as a tourism destination and a museum. So essentially, we've only been into the public domain for 41 years now. And in these 41 years, the different areas of the fort, vis-a-vis the Jaivan cannon, which is believed to have been forged within the fort itself. It was forged in the year 1720 under the aegis of Savai Jai Singh II. That particular cannon, water harvesting and management systems, very beautifully laid out charbagh, which is in direct contrast with the fort being a garrison fort, so to speak. And these areas have been opened up to the public. So before that particular year of 1982, access to Jaigarh was closely regulated, and unless the Maharaja gave in writing a permission to anybody desirous of visiting the fort, duly attested by the Kiledar. So, funnily enough, the post that I hold now at Jaigarh as Assistant Director of the Trust would have corresponded to the Kiledar back when we were still managed entirely by the rules of yore, when the Maharaja held substantial infantry within the fort. So the Kiledar would have been the officer in charge. He or she, well, it was predominantly men, And it's only after the fort was opened up to public that women started taking up roles of responsibility, because these were military roles, that the Kiledar would have been responsible for the day-to-day administration, making sure that the soldiers were taking part in their physical activities, being made sure that the water systems were functioning just fine. And all of the day-to-day operations were under the Kiledar. So Jaigarh functioned as a self-sufficient unit, which had its own water. There must have been some stores that would have been used to store granary and day-to-day provisions for the infantry that was housed within. And Jaigarh was not really a place of residence unless in times of duress, or if the Maharaja decided at some point of time during monsoon. For instance, the students who visited Jaigarh were able to do it in the best season. Jaigarh is perched high up on a hill, and there are sweeping views of the surrounding valley that is replete with green vegetation. Almost seems unreal that you are in a state that also has a desert. So this entire space would have probably been used as a retreat also by the Maharaja at some point of time, because the day it rains, it's almost like the clouds have descended upon Jaigarh. So there are certain palace areas within the fort that are documented to have been added by Savai Jai Singh II in the 18th century. Now, we need to understand that this building activity that was going on in Jaigarh was contemporary or slightly preceding the building activity that was going on about 11 miles to the south on the plains where the city of Jaipur was conceived and it was being built. So this is the brainchild, the extension of Jaigarh is the brainchild of Savai Jai Singh II. Now, he is a very astute politician. He's remarkably sharp. He was the fact that the title of Savai was accorded to him by the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, because he found him to be wittier and sharper than his contemporaries. So Sawa is a term which is 1.25, so it's a quarter. So Aurangzeb remarks that you are a quarter better than your contemporaries. You're a quarter better than your fellow man in terms of your wit, in terms of your bravery, in terms of your being able to align yourself with the powers that be. And this was a personal commendation from the Mughal Emperor at that point of time to the descendants of Mirza Raja Jai Singh and Raja Man Singh of Amer. So Savai Jai Singh is this very sharp, young, dynamic ruler who's also an astronomer and a man of science, who decides that I'm going to make a new city to the south of my existing capital of Amer, and I'm going to make certain additions to the formidable fort of Jaigarh, which had never been defeated. It had never been captured. It had never been assaulted at time of war. So the very character of Jaigarh has evolved over centuries. At one point of time, it was stoic, robust, very exuding a lot of masculinity, because that is what it's for. And then subsequently, Jai Singh decides to add the palace complex. He adds Subhat Nivas, which was for army briefings. And then he adds another smaller courtyard beyond it, which was the Kilpati Nivas. This was for meetings of slightly more strategic nature. This is where he could meet his ministers. It was a slightly closed off area. Following subsequently to that, he designs and conceives this Lakshmi Vilas courtyard, which had a separate area for nautch girls to perform, where performances could be held, musicians could play, and then there was a very airy pavilion where he could have hosted people during ceremonies. It had attached bedchambers, slightly more decorated with Araish dado panels and marble flooring or Araish flooring. And just next to Lakshmi Vilas, he built something which interprets water in a very different manner. So the rainwater harvesting system is different. And then he brings in water and makes a hammam. Now, this hammam would have separate cold water and hot water provisions. Cold water would be easier to supply, but hot water would have been heated with mechanisms that had copper plates embedded into the floor. A similar hammam is also seen at the Amer Palace, but we need to realize the distinction between the Amer Palace, which was indeed furnished as a residential unit for the royal family, vis-a-vis the fort. Now, this fort was not, as I previously said, was not supposed to be used exclusively for residential purpose, but that does not mean that the Maharaja is not going to cater to his taste for luxury, or he's not going to provide a safe space for his queens to be able to unwind, because war is something that was inevitable when we were from the ruling class and when we were kings, and we're talking of the 18th century, but that does not mean that they would compromise on how they would live life. So there's the hammam, and then there are different summer chambers, and there are winter bedrooms. And then comes the epitome of everything that could be luxurious, or the epitome of removing yourself from the stark reality that you've probably sought refuge in a fort from the very palatial complex down below the hill. You arrive at the Charbagh, built exactly as per the Mughal concepts of laying a bagh, which is divided geometrically into 4 or 8 or 16 parts. This particular bagh also had fountains that could be operated via gravity. So water would be stored higher up, and then by use of channels that would widen and narrow, and that's how they would build pressure, and fountains would operate within the Charbagh complex. So you see that from the very stoic 12th or 13th century structure that would have been the Jaigarh, which was later also used as a magazine, and where we've recently also relocated our collections of butt rifles and swords and such to another part of our fort. So there was the Jaigarh fortress within a fort, and then there were the water harvesting systems, which is incidentally are going to be the next thing I speak about. And then there was a palace complex. So Jaigarh has evolved depending on what king was patroning that, what was the geopolitical situations at that point of time, and how the personal preferences and the personal inclinations of the kings who were ruling over Dhundhar at that point of time would have shaped the development. However, one thing remained constant for Jaigarh. It was its history of being the military center point, and the fact that it was the most closely guarded secret of the Kachawa dynasty. And I say secret because there were visitors who were entertained in Amer Palace. We have, travel accounts of different travelers from different centuries who've talked about how majestic the palace complex in Amer was, or how there was a sheesh mahal, or how there was a hammam for the king. There are subsequently travelers' accounts describing Jaipur as a city with wide avenues and straight roads and 90 degrees and water step wells and all of that. But in all of these travelers' accounts, we never find a mention of what it was to be inside of Jaigarh. Why? Because it was not for public access. Regardless of how trusted that particular traveler would have been, the rulers of Jaipur, and I'm making a mistake here, the rulers of Dhundhar, I must say, because Jaipur only came about in the 18th century, and Dhundhar was incidentally the name of the particular princely state. Jaipur happened to be the capital of Dhundhar. Similarly, how previous to that, Amer would have been the capital of Dhundhar. In Dhundhar, the principality, the principal state would have extended far beyond the boundaries of Amer as a town. So the rulers of Dhundhar made sure that this was one, built footprint that was the most closely guarded secret. They had a gun foundry here, the technical know-how of which had been imported, so to speak, by Raja Man Singh of Amer, who also served as a commander in the Mughal army at the time of Akbar. And he was also the hero of many military campaigns. and was instrumental in the Mughal army being able to consolidate a lot many annexations that they undertook. So Jaigarh remained as it was, a very elusive mention. They do mention also the name Jaigarh is subsequent to Savai Jai Singh II. So the particular epithet of Jaigarh is only mentioned in onwards the 18th century because Jai Singh decided to rename the fort. Prior to that, anytime you would find a mention of a fort, it would always be a fort at Amer. And the summit upon which it is built would be referred to as Chilkatola. So there are some archival maps that can still be found within the Pothikana of the Maharaja Savai Man Singh Second Museum Trust that operates within the City Palace Jaipur complex. These maps would mention the summit upon which Jaigarh is built as the Chilkatola. And even now on dry, hot summer days, we can see eagles flying up here. So probably that is what led credence to the name. But it would always be Amer Ka Kila. That is it. It didn't have a name. But subsequently, we start seeing the mentions of Amer Ka Kila, Jaigarh. Now, another thing that happens is we always end up calling it Jaigarh Fort, which is a dichotomy because Garh already means fort. So the name in itself is complete when you say Jaigarh. So it's the fort of Amer, Jaigarh. So I intended this to be a short introduction to what Jaigarh is, but then I thought it's better to give you a complete overview. Now, the water harvesting and management systems of Jaigarh, which are a very, very unique feature, and in fact, we're very glad and proud that we are partnering with the Center for Heritage Conservation at CEPT University. They are also sharing their technical expertise with us, and we are currently a part of an MOU wherein we are working on producing sustainable conservation strategies for the fort, and with special attention being given to the water harvesting features. So we have a network of 5 different tankas, is what we call them. So there's basically a bigger gargantuan one version of a pani ki tanki, so a tanka. We have 5 of these within the fort. 4 of which cater to water that is brought in from the hills. There's a very complex but very interesting scientifically derived network of masonry plastered water channels that bring in water to the fort of Jaigarh. And then 1 tanka which caters to the runoff that we bring down and harvest from the terraces of the various palaces and the various structures within the fort. So the water channels that bring in water to Jaigarh start from almost 4 kilometers south of Jaigarh, and they would make very interesting figures of 8. And there's a higher altitude in some, and then they would bring in lower. The water would gain speed, and then again the water would go against gravity, but because it has that speed, all the sedimentation, all the debris that the water is carrying would be left down. It is punctuated at regular intervals by sedimentation pits, and then finally enters the fort from the point where Jaivan is also kept. So the students who were lucky enough to be here at Jaigarh have seen the different areas where water is collected into the fort and how it enters. It enters there. There are 2 more sedimentation pits where final sedimentation happens, and then via a network of sluice gates, the first couple of rains of water from the first couple of rains is redirected into an open tanka, which we refer to as the Nathavadoka tanka. This is a huge site to the south of the fort, and perhaps at one point of time was also used as a quarry for building material. Because of the way the base of the tanka is shaped, it seems that there was systematic chiseling of stone, and that stone would have been used as the building material quarry. Subsequently, it was used to store water so that whatever remaining debris would have been carried by the water is not going into the main drinking water reservoirs, but kept outside. This water would have been used for irrigation or landscaping purposes, if at all, but majorly this was used for the animals, the steeds that we had, the elephants or the camel that we would have had within the fort complex. When we close off the sluice gate from this first particular tanka, we let it go into another sedimentation pits. We're real fans of those. We are in a state where there's a lot of airborne dust, and so there are sedimentation pits at almost every 10 to 15 meters of water channels within the fort. This water can further go from that sedimentation pits to two different tankas. One is our tanka, the most famous, also infamous because at the time of emergency, Srimati Indira Gandhi, our former Prime Minister, made sure that some parts of the tanka were dug because of belief, so to speak, that we had some hidden treasure here. There's a personal belief that that hidden treasure was indeed the fact that we could hold 1 crore liter of water within that tanka. Now, this is an underground structure built entirely out of masonry and lime plaster. It is fantastical in the way it has been constructed. A very stable structure. However, there have been leakages over the years, which we are in the process of repairing now. But this thing measures 140 feet by 160 feet and is about 40 feet deep. The roof of this particular tanka is supported by 81 pylons, again, masonry structures finished with lime plaster. And basic calculations give us that figure that we can actually hold about 1 crore liter of water. Now, in a state that only receives rainfall for 2 months, essentially, this is our biggest treasure. Water that is fit for drinking. It's entirely portable. It is covered. It is safe for drinking purposes. And we continue to use that water for daily use whenever we have enough in it. Subsequently, there are 2 more tankas. One is an open tanka, which we let fill. And in fact, right now, because we've been blessed with abundant rain this monsoon, that particular tanka is 90% full right now. So we use that water to irrigate our plants. We have a lot of banana plantation here at Jaigarh and other hardy trees that we have. And then there's a third tanka, which is about 58 feet deep. It has a network of 9 wells right at the base, and then there are steps to actually access up to the base of this. So I would have believed that the treasure that it was being alluded to that lied in Jaigarh was the technical know-how and the scientific precision with which water has been harvested from almost 5 square kilometers and brought to the fort and stored in a manner that it can be used by the residents and can be stored for eventuality. So this water harvesting features, this formalized construction of this water harvesting system can actually be attributed to Savai Jai Singh II. And this is about a 300-year-old water harvesting and management system. Previously to this, these were not formalized, but we still collected water within certain low-lying areas in and around the fort, which is evident from the map that I referred to in the beginning, the late 15th or the early 16th century map, which marks upon it Pani Ki Dhal. So there are topographical features that have been recorded in that map, and there are arrows that with clear mentions the Pani Ki Dhal, and there are 3 pockets that have been marked that this is where the water would accumulate because there must have been low-lying points. So the fact that the builders of that time and the Maharaja at that point of time could identify that this particular system had potential, and if formalized and built with masonry, because they would stay for posterity, these water channels would bring in water. That is something that is almost as wondrous as the dams that we built today. And these dams are being built with contemporary building material. These dams are being built with the aid of machines, which was not the case back then, which makes it so much more special. And the fact that it still functions. I mean, I have I took the liberty to put it all in a presentation that unfortunately is not playing with your screens, but they function and they function pretty well. Each monsoon we have a systematic, SOP, which we activate in the months of May. And that's when we start cleaning our water channels. If they're swept properly, they're repaired if required, so that by the end of June or the beginning of July, when we start receiving rainfall, there is no impediment in the rainwater actually coming and being stored. Now, this was entirely about Jaigarh. I'll shift my focus a little to the sister fort, as I call it, of Dhundhar, the Nahargarh fort. Now, Nahargarh is about 5 kilometers drive from Jaigarh. The unifying factor is that Jaigarh and Nahargarh lie on the same ridge. Now, this is a ridge that goes north-south. On the north is perched Jaigarh overlooking Amer, which is a World Heritage Site. And on the south is the fort of Nahargarh, perched upon the ridge, overlooking another World Heritage Site, newly minted, however, the city of Jaipur. And together, these forts form the most formidable defense ring that would have made it possible for the Maharaja to sleep at ease at nights. Now, if you were to do a quick Google search on Jaigarh, the first article that hits you tells you that Jaigarh is about 3 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. Now, this is not the fort proper. It is inclusive of the fortification walls. Now, the first ring of fortification walls is about 3 kilometers into it. The second fortification wall would also encompass the fort of Nahargarh. And the third ring would have been even wider. However, unluckily, we're not able to trace most of it now because with the ravages of time and because of lack of maintenance, these fortification walls have been lost and being encroached by the vegetation that lies around it, because they were mostly upon the ridges of the hills that surround Jaigarh and Nahargarh. And these are the Aravalis, actually. So there's a horseshoe-shaped Aravali formation around the city of Jaipur, and then subsequently to the north is where Jaigarh is lying. So Nahargarh is contemporary to Jaipur. In the 7 years subsequent to the establishment of Jaipur in 1727, in those 7 years, Jai Singh decided that he needed that one hill atop to the north of Jaigarh, which actually provided it wonderful natural defense, to be surmounted by a hill. At that point of time, it was a collection of barracks. It was different bastions being surmounted in a manner that if a cannon was mounted on those bastions, it was able to safeguard the entry points to the city of Jaipur, or at least be able to not cause damage to the city, but make sure that if anybody were trying to intrude, they could be easily checked. So that was the basic outline of what Nahargarh would have been. There's also a parallel story of the fact that it was not indeed supposed to be called Nahargarh. It was supposed to be called Sudarshangarh. Now, there are two beliefs for that. One would have been that it is because it offered sweeping views of the city, but something that is more believable would have been Jaipur being a Krishna city. Now, we are deeply entrenched in Vaishnavism. Our patron deity is Govind Devji, who is a form of Krishna. Sudarshan Chakra is the all supreme weapon that Vishnu has. And that is why Sudarshangarh would have been that particular fort, which would have afforded Jaipur absolutely non-negotiable protection from whatever invading forces would have been. So again, I give you parallel narratives so that you can decide which narrative you would wish to put more stock in. Personally, I put more stock in the fact that Sudarshangarh would have been borrowed. The inspiration is borrowed from Sudarshan Chakra. Also makes it sound, more divine, so to speak. But so that is why. But yes, why was it renamed to Nahargarh? Now, because I'm speaking predominantly to students of CEPT University, you would remember, if you've been told, that the Bhadra Fort has a story that no, not Bhadra Fort, Manik Burj has a story that Manik Baba would have cursed, and every day you would build it and then it would fall in the evening and you couldn't build it. And then he had some spirit had to be captured or something had to be done so that it could be built. So Manik Baba and Manik Burj, I'm probably confusing the story, but please go ahead and do a little bit of research on that story. Something similar is also said for Nahargarh, that the spirit of the guardian of that particular hill and the forest would not let the building activity to continue beyond each night. So every day when they constructed some part of the fort, at night it would be demolished, and then people would have to restart building activity in the morning. This was the spirit of Nahar Singh Bhumia that resided and protected the forests where the fort was being built. And the Maharaja then decided that a temple would be consecrated in his name, and the fort would be renamed as Nahargarh in recognition of him being the guardian deity. Only subsequent to that decision being taken was the fort built in its entirety. So that is why from Sudarshangarh it was renamed to Nahargarh. But Nahargarh, while it is a very popular destination for the people of Jaigarh, because the moment it rains, people in Jaipur want to make a beeline for Nahargarh because it offers lovely views of the city. It remains important because one, it overlooked Jaipur, and second, again, similarly to Jaigarh, it has seen an evolution. So during the reign of Ram Singh II, that spanned about 1835 to 1880, he added some areas to the Nahargarh fort and made it from a fort shift to being more suited for occupation by the king. So some palatial complexes were added. And it also was important because at time of unrest, the British resident and his family were given refuge in the Nahargarh fort. So it was aloof, it remained separated from the city. In fact, during the mutiny of 1857, that is where Savai Ram Singh actually moved a lot of Europeans and British officials for their safety to the Nahargarh fort. A controversial story about it is also that one of the very infamous courtesans was also imprisoned for a brief period in Nahargarh fort. Tourist guides would tell you that the different suites were made for the queens, and they attribute it to Savai Madho Singh II. But there are 9 suites there, and he only had 5 wedded wives. So it's not essentially because he made them for his wives. But Nahargarh, at one point of time, left behind its role as a fort and an offerer of protection, and moved into the realm of being a retreat palace. So during the later half of the reign of Savai Ram Singh II and subsequently Madho Singh II, who is attributed with the construction of the Madhavendra Bhavan, which forms the major part of the Nahargarh fort now. Madhavendra Bhavan is this very beautiful, delicately articulated structure that you see first when you look at Nahargarh. So the yellow palace that one would see when they're standing in Jaipur, almost any corner of Jaipur, is not the original fort that Savai Jai Singh built. He built this fort walls, the fortification, the bastions. But the most beautiful part, which is now often confused as being the main part, is as recent as 1894. Built by Savai Madho Singh II and called the Madhavendra Bhavan. And this is also where you see the transition of how Jaipur's artistic and architectural sensibilities were evolving with more interface with the British at that point of time. Savai Ram Singh II was the first ruler who had a British resident in his court because he was made king when he was an infant, and he had a regent in his mother. His mother ruled in his name for the longest time. And the British made sure at that point of time that a resident would be positioned in the court so as to make this young Maharaja very sympathetic to the British cause. Now, we don't know how successful the British were, we don't think they were very successful because Savai Ram Singh happens to be one of the most staunch rulers in terms of protecting the interests of his subjects. He was the one who established a Sanskrit school in Jaipur, one which still runs. So there's a Sanskrit medium school in Jaipur that has been in operation since 1855. It runs within one of the most famous temple complexes of Jaipur. But this is Savai Ram Singh's legacy. His legacy also includes the gas lamps that came to Jaipur in 1878. He was the one who introduced piped water supply to the city of Jaipur. He was also the one who made sure the paving onto the main roads of Jaipur was made in a material that carriages found it easier to run on those instead of the cobbles. He made sure the ashlar masonry was used. So this king is succeeded by Savai Madho Singh II, who, despite being at the forefront of the Indo-British dialogue, retained very strong values of what it took to be an Indian king. And this man designs a palace that leaves behind all the architectural principles of Jaipuri construction, barring the courtyard. We never had attached washrooms and attached toilets or attached kitchens within our built spaces, but the palace within Nahargarh Fort has individual suites that were designed whether for queens or for whoever, that had each of these suites have an attached toilet, two of them, one to be used while the other one would be closed off so that the decomposition of whatever night soil is carried down to the floors below can take place. So that alternating toilet system was very much in place. They had kitchens, the chimneys of which would actually open up onto the roof. And they had the dual system of summer chambers being on the lower floor and the winter chambers being on the upper floor. And each of these had an independent access to the terrace above their suites. So the concept of modular construction and this very British way of designing, wherein there used to be a self-sufficient unit for each of the residential quarters within the fort, was brought into the picture. This is where you start seeing that despite being a fort, the Maharajas were in such a space socio-politically that they were confident that they could afford to get out of that military mindset and actually start building and using their spaces for luxury and for enjoyment. So at one point we have the Jaigarh Fort, which still is pretty robust. I mean, it's still a garrison fort. We have our cannons on display here. We have an armory. We have the gun foundry, which is quite prized. In fact, we're now trying to figure out if there are other contemporary forts within the Indian subcontinent which have a gun foundry. And our gun foundry, we are blessed that we've been able to restore it and keep it in a functional state, that the moving mechanisms of the foundry are still working. So at one point, we have, at one hand, we have the Jaigarh Fort, and at the other hand, we have the Nahargarh Fort, which evolved in such a manner that it became more akin to being a palace that was fortified than being a fort in its entirety. And the interrelationship of these both forts was simply that in time of need, whether the ruling family would have come up through Amer, because there is a route that still connects Jaigarh to Amer, whether they would have escaped Amer and come to Jaigarh, or subsequently after establishment of Jaipur, whether they would have escaped the city palace complex down below and come up to Nahargarh. These two forts formed an impregnable ring of defense and would have functioned as sister units. Also, because the fortification wall would encompass both those premises together, the rainwater, which could have been poisoned otherwise, the rainwater that was being brought into the fort did run the risk that it could have been poisoned. However, as we talked previously, Jaigarh has a system where all the runoff from the terraces is also collected. That water could have been used. Nahargarh in itself has two open step wells, which could have harvested the water. However, that water was never really used by the occupants of Nahargarh. Instead, it would have been used as a buffer or as a safeguard for when Jaipur ran out of water. Because there's an intricate mechanism near the Baramori, which is northwest of the city of Jaipur, which could have actually brought in water from the step wells of Nahargarh. Now, most people that I think are watching this lecture today would not be from the generation which would have watched the movie Rang De Vasante. But this was a movie that came out in 2006. And that was a movie that catapulted Nahargarh into fame because there's a scene where Amer Khan actually goes back and jumps into the Bawri. So even in the cohesive history of Jaipur, the forts of Nahargarh and Jaigarh remained elusive for the longest time because these were guarded secrets. Now, this is where the king would have, held his strategic and military meetings. And it was not something that the common man had access to. The fates of both forts, of course, in the recent decades following independence, saw a very stark diversion. Jaigarh, because it is retained by the family and managed by the Jaigarh Public Charitable Trust, the erstwhile royal family of Jaipur has a very large say in how it is. In fact, not the very large, they have all the say in how the property is going to be managed. And the sensibilities of how we manage the property are thoroughly tempered by wanting to safeguard the legacy of the dynasty that the current Maharaja Savai Padmanabh Singh of Jaipur espouses. Whereas Nahargarh, because it is a monument that has now been administered by the State Archaeology and Museum Department for almost 65 years now, almost 70 years actually, following the Covenant of Jaipur being signed between the princely state of Jaipur and the Union of India, the management strategy is very different. Nahargarh has been opened up to public for far longer than Jaigarh is, but the approach towards managing these two forts is very different. As I said, the family still holds Jaigarh very dear to their heart because they are able to firsthand appreciate the thought process or the value that would have gone behind building such a large edifice, whereas the government can at times treat it only as real estate. There are maintenance issues, of course. Nahargarh is maintained by the government, and then the concept of using the lowest bid often is the biggest bane when you're thinking of retrofitting or conservation processes. Whereas when you talk of a family that's actually trying to protect the legacy of its ancestors, we don't usually spare any expense in trying to preserve whatever has been handed over to us by our predecessors. So the administration differs, the maintenance differs, the very ethos of both forts differs now. Nahargarh is treated more like a picnic spot, whereas Jaigarh, when one visits the fort, can still feel that there is something that connects the fort to how the city has grown, or how the dynasty that built the fort has contributed towards the city becoming what it is. We are a fairly recently declared World Heritage Site. It's only been 5 years. But the fact that one of our criteria is living tradition, the living tradition is followed very much at Jaigarh. Each Dashera, we have the Shastra Puja, wherein the priests from the city palace would visit. And they conduct a Shastra Puja where all our cannons, our spears, the swords, some of the shields are worshipped. And they're tied with new moli, or the red sacred thread. And subsequently, Kal Bhairav is also worshipped during the Bhairavashtami. On Jal Jhulni Ekadashi, which I should be able to tell you exactly what lunar phase, but Jal Jhulni Ekadashi, that's what I remember. The priests again come from the city palace, and we worship the water in the large tanka. We basically add alum and lime powder to it, declaring it fit for consumption for drinking purpose. Now, this is also scientifically derived because post-monsoon, it receives about 45-60 days for all the debris to settle. And if I were to collect a water sample from the tanka at that point of time, it is almost crystal clear. So we do practice the same traditions that were at one point of time practiced while we were still being ruled by Maharajas, to make sure that everybody who's occupying the fort or is involved in it feels a connection. And there is a sense of continuity, which would essentially evoke within you the feeling that you need to go over and beyond and perform your duty as somebody who's responsible for any of the functions within the fort. As I said, I am akin to a kilidar. So unless I am involved in making sure that the fort functions the way it used to, why would I feel any motivation to contribute to making sure that the legacy remains undisrupted? So between the different forts that we have, there is a stark difference in how Jaigarh and Nahargarh would be perceived. And maybe simply because I work here, I would feel that Jaigarh continues to espouse that concept of being the safeguarding, feature of what the dynasty stands for. Jaigarh indeed happens to be the oldest built structure now that can be documented and witnessed that holds such a direct connection to the royal family of Mudar and now Jaipur. This is the oldest property that exists within everything that they would have built. And that adds tremendous value to why it's safeguarding or why experiencing Jaigarh in a manner that we are now trying to offer, whether it is to students or to researchers or even to visitors who would visit the fort as tourists, get to experience. So, I think so far this is what I wanted to share with you, and gives me immense pleasure that students decided that students, and of course Riyaz, all credit to you and to Kairavi for being so diligent with trying to follow up with whatever we want to do, that the students have decided that this is worthy of attention and effort, because the fort offers plenty. It's just that what do you pick up on and what do you start researching on? So in case there are any questions.
No, actually, Chandni, thank you for this. And and the detailed interaction you also had with the students earlier and with us. It's a treasure trove of historical opportunities, so to say, to open up so many different questions. So very happy to be engaged. I just wanted to ask you before students kind of are bound to kind of hound you with their own questions. But I wanted to ask you about this, this shift in what came across in your narrative of perception of both Jaigarh and Nahargarh from a military building or structure to one that seems to be of pleasure also, a place of pleasure as well. And this is a conversation that we've been having in different ways in the class as to, how external circumstances perhaps played a role in that, whether it was a particular diplomatic treaty with, let's say, the Mughals, that allowed the fort to be then looked at in a different way, not so much about military things. But I just wanted you to perhaps expand on some of your kind of understandings of this relationship or this change that took place in the way that forts were looked at, perhaps, or the political kind of situations that allowed them to kind of look at their forts or even develop them in terms of pleasure and all the things you mentioned, palatial rather than military.
So the first time we start talking about this evolution, or this shift, this paradigm shift of the military structure being now retrofitted to cater to the demands of, not demands I would say, but the wants of luxury or comfort. Now Amer down the hill already had a hammam. It had the Sheesh Mahal. All of that precedes Jai Singh's idea. So here is a ruler that wants to make a mark in terms of building something new. He was delving into astronomy, mathematics, physics. He was building an entire new city, and this is a man who started to give his name. Now it does him a lot of disfavor, it doesn't do him any favors if I say that he was very vain about naming things after him, but he made sure that he did that. So that is basically leaving a legacy behind. Could have been motivated, of course, strengthened and bolstered by the fact that he was in a comfortable place with the Mughals, who were the powers at the center. But he also perhaps wanted to leave a legacy that was slightly more. And this is a man who's newly discovered that everything built is going to exceed lifetimes. They're going to remain there for lifetimes altogether. His knowledge could have not been respected, because somebody may or may not, somebody who descends from him may or may not be able to appreciate the nuances of astronomical tables. But something that's built, something that's physical, would, stay. So that's a personal idea from me. And there's also a quote, I don't even remember who said that, but architecture is one form of art that explains with great exactitude the growth and the decadence of the man who built it. So Jai Singh, I think, realized very early on that anything that he builds and anything that would have a physical footprint would be received far better, and it would remain onto the, for the lack of better word, patak shape. शहर के पटाख shape पे वो ज़्यादा दिन चलेगी. So, these are more permanent. And we now think that concrete has 50 years lifetime and 100 years. We build for much smaller spans. Men who were building 300 years ago built for centuries altogether. So I think he would have started to first add on to the fort simply because he wanted to, add something that would go way beyond his lifetime. And then he would have, motivated by maybe a demand from a favorite queen. There should be a hammam, there can be a fountain. And also the fact that the ridge suddenly dips on the site that the Charbagh is, we realize that the ridge actually dips. That's where it ends, very, disjointedly. So it's not that he had to do a cut and fill. So perhaps it was a very bright site engineer at that point of time, or even Vidyadhar, who would have given an idea that, how come, this is how it can be built. We can do a terraced garden here. Instead of abruptly ending the fort, why not extend it to here? And that is where you've built Sagar, and this would be a very beautiful spot. This offers you a lovely sight over Amer. This can be a garden, it's a leisure palace. So anything that's built is a result of a lot many stakeholders. Some are recognized, some are not. But because Vidyadhar was so keenly involved, and we do realize that this is a man with a vision, and with the tenacity that he ensured that the Maharaja's vision was translated onto stark reality, onto the ground. So the very radical shift that we see in Jai Singh's time could have a lot to do with how he saw the world. And then subsequently, Ram Singh adding the cast iron balustrades or the cast iron tin shed. He was a fan of cast iron. And I'm speaking very candidly when I say that, because he added similar structures at Sukh Niwas in the City Palace complex of Jaipur. It is exactly the same design which is on the floor that His Highness occupies currently. That's his personal chambers, the Maharaja's personal chambers. But we see similar cast iron features there also. So, and then Madhav Singh II is credited with the fantastical architectural development in the city of Jaipur and beyond. The cenotaph that he built for Ram Singh II was gorgeous. Madhavendra Palace had very refined architectural sensibilities on display. His own cenotaph at Jaigarh ki Chhatriyan is fantastical. The two cenotaphs that are dedicated to his two favorite wives, one of them who was not a royal by blood. She was a commoner because he married her before he ascended the throne of Jaipur. So her cenotaph was executed with the most exquisite craftsmanship on display. Now, this was a man who was so confident in how he was placed. He was at the fore of the dialogues. The Princess Conference of, I think, 1917 or late 1917, I think. He was one of the princes who was invited by the then Viceroy to have a dialogue about the situations of the princely states and the interaction that they had with the British crown at that point of time. So he started adding things. So that is where we see that radical shift. It was always motivated by the king's sensibilities and by this confidence that they were secure in their holding of power and that they were on a good stand with the powers that be. We see no such activity in the forts during Savai Pratap Singh, who, while he built a lot of stuff in Jaipur, he built Hawa Mahal, he built very many temples. He ruled during the most precarious time of when the Marathas were at our doors, not once, not twice, but thrice, and extracted tribute that was as high as 17 lakh rupees at that point of time. We're talking of the last decade of the 18th century. So we don't see a lot of construction happening at Nahargarh or Jaigarh at that point of time because forts were far removed. It is quite like what is out of sight is out of mind. So Jai Singh, when he moves his capital from Amer to Jaipur, he decides to extend Jaigarh a little. And then subsequently, those rulers who actually came to this side of the city, who visited Amer, would have then decided to add their own little touches to the fort of Jaigarh and Nahargarh. So, but again, none of this has been analyzed from that point of view, and these questions have not been asked often, if at all. And we don't have any literature that corroborates what I'm saying. But again, entirely based on my personal readings or my understanding of what these Maharajas would have been thinking at that point of time, and corresponding them to the other developments that were taking place in and around Jaipur, their alliances, their marriages, because marriages were the strongest form of building alliances. So marriages, I'm sure, were a very solid motivation to build things. Sisodia Rani of Kabag in Jaipur was built because the Sisodia princess wanted something that was greener than the stark reality of Jaipur. So I'm sure women have always been the motivating factor.
Okay. On that note, I'll open it up to the students to ask you.
Yes, before we
Yes,
start
Maureen
our
has
Q&A
joined.
session, the next session was scheduled 1:30, and we still have a Q&A.
So sorry to have run over it.
No, thanks a lot, Chandni. I think this was very helpful for the students for sure. The in-depth full perspective about Jaigarh and Nahargarh.
Well, for that matter, I'll say this again, I'm accessible at any time. Please, if any student has any questions, please tell them to feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah. So we will go through like that. I think students do have a few questions, but we can probably reach out to you through mail
Absolutely.
and at your convenience.
Sure.
Respond back to us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chandni, and look forward to catching up again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, welcome, Maureen. I'm sorry we've taken a little bit of your time.
No, that's fine. Actually, I kind of have time. So if the students want to ask the questions, I can delay a little. It depends on how the course is going for you.
I leave that
Sure.
to Kairavi if Chandni hasn't already left us.
Oh no, I'm right here. I just
okay.
put
So
myself
then
on
we
mute.
Okay, so then we can open it up for about 10 minutes. Is that all right, Maureen?
Yes, absolutely. Don't worry.
Thank
That
you.
works for me.
Okay, that's
Hello.
that's for you guys now to kind of start your videos, questions.
Yeah, sorry, the camera's not really working, but I have a question. I'm Nalini. I think I had contacted you personally, like with a series
Oh
of doubts.
yes,
Yeah, thanks.
yes.
So it's sort of not related to the discussion, but I mean, this was a doubt I think I was planning on asking for a while now.
Mhm.
So, for example, what factors determine the ownership and management of historically significant temples? For example, the Sri Narsingji temple in Amer, it is under litigation between the government, like the ASI, and the royal family.
Yeah.
So, who owns it? And also, for example, a lot of the other temples in the area come under ASI, but
Mhm.
you know, like when we personally interviewed them, we sort of realized that there wasn't much, in the sense, nothing at all that the ASI sort of maintain or control spaces. So, what challenges arise when balancing the religious importance with the need for historical preservation based on these changes in ownership? Because sometimes you have the family taking it up for themselves to maintain. Some places you have the ASI that sort of did conserve a few temples, but then you don't have that many people coming there because they lost the idol.
I lost you for a bit there. I would also request if you can just type out that question so that I can respond to it. But what part I did hear was, so for ownership, it's a supplement. Hello? Fall in the ASI's jurisdiction. However, say for instance, the nursing temple was very important for the dynasty because I think I even mentioned there's a saying that says "Jab tak nursing devli mein, tab tak raj hateli mein." So, nursing that idol was gifted by an ascetic to one of the queens of one of the rulers of Amer, which is why it was considered to be a Nij Seva temple of the royal family. Now, it so happened that after the independence, because we signed a covenant and we gave up a lot of properties to the government for management, also because it was practically impossible for the royal family of Jaipur to be managing all these properties, given the fact that we were abolishing their systems of administration. Because if the king or the family were responsible for the management, then their systems should also be in place. So a lot of properties were actually acceded to the government. The government was to establish a Devasthan Vibhag, which would have had the exclusive responsibility of managing these temples. In fact, I'll bring to your notice that there are some temples that lie currently in the state of Uttar Pradesh that are managed, administered, and run by the Devasthan Vibhag of Rajasthan. These were temples that had been built by the rulers of Jaipur or Alwar or Bharatpur and the other princely states, but now they used to lie in the Braj region. So now they lie in the state of Uttar Pradesh, but we still manage and run them because of the associated values and the fact that the ownership lies with the government there. So, unfortunately, there are not clear rules of what goes to the government now or the ASI and what retains with the family. But the family has a very consolidated list of the temples they manage. The Jambai Mata, which is a Kuldevi in Jambaramgarh, is with the family. So is Shila Mata, that is in the palace of Amer. And there are a couple of more temples within the city that are managed by the family. The rest automatically are shifted to the Devasthan Vibhag, which has different criteria of how it gives the funding. So there are some Swatah Prabhavi temples which manage their own administration in terms of their priest is appointed by the government, but the salary of the priest and the running costs of the temples are borne by the temple itself. They can have a trust, they can be managing with the donations they receive, or they can be earning rent from the different shops that are within the temple. For instance, the Govind Devji temple does that. And the Ramchandriji temple in the city is a combined management system wherein some parts of the administration are borne by the temple administration and the others are borne by the government. So this is a very complex mechanism which unfortunately does not have the clarity that you seek. I can, however, share contacts of any officials from the Devasthan Vibhag if you think that that would be helpful. And
yeah, I think that would be really helpful. So, and also thank you. That was a very nice. I didn't really understand that the royal family wouldn't have been able to manage these temples at the time.
Because there are close to 3,000 temples in Jaipur, and come to think of it, most temples, if they did not lie within someone's home, would have been on the main roads built by some Maharaja. Women used to build a lot of temples as part of charitable activity because those temples would also be schools. So the priests, when they were not performing the functions of being a functional priest, would teach children. So this is how a lot like how madrasas function still. So the temples also had schools, and women, noble women, or the royal women would function, fund these schools and the temples and such. So post-independence, there would have been almost 1,000 temples for the family to manage. So in a way, I think they made a very right decision of ceding a lot of them to the government. Also, then the rules would be different. Like the royals could have chosen to not let everybody have access. There are some family temples still which are run by different erstwhile noble families. So they have different rules of access. It's not accessible to everybody. So in a way, it's good that those temples actually went back to the public.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
I think we have time for one more question. Ishita, you wanted to ask?
Hi, Chandni. I just want to ask you one question. I think Sri Vishal is typing it. It's there. It's there in the chat.
Okay, particularly in relation to tourism and events held at the site. Well, a Jaigarh Public Charitable Trust is essentially the only unit that manages the fort. So contemporary management and development of Jaigarh, whatever projects that we take up, whether they're retrofitting or restoration, I happen to be a conservation architect and I'm here full time. So unless it is beyond my technical expertise, in which case we seek out consultants, we do things in-house. So we have recently passed an annual plan, which is going to talk about augmentation of visitor facilities. We are doing a new interpretation center for the fort and the water systems. We are redesigning our ticketing system. We are conceptualizing a few more walks, which are going to be self-guided. We are trying to partner with organizations which would be able to allow people to connect to our in-house Wi-Fi and then explore the fort by means of an app wherein they can have different stories or they can have augmented reality. So all of that is actually spearheaded by the JPCT. And the events, so the royal family has a different arm, which is the commercial arm of the family, which manages the hosting of events at Jaigarh, whether it's a commercial function, like for instance, last year, Tata Motors did their annual get together and stuff at Jaigarh. So that was a corporate event. There are people who rent the fort for cocktails or for sangeet or marriages or whatever, engagements and stuff. So that is taken care of by the commercial arm, not by JPCT. We essentially do only tourism related activities, wherein we remain open from 9 to 6:30 in the evening, 9 a.m. to 6:30 for visitors. So we manage our museum collection, we make sure that the galleries are operational, and we do our royal walks and the regular walk tours, and restoration activities as and when they're required. So that's essentially what JPCT does. We have administrators, we have accounts, we have myself as the assistant director and the conservation architect, and we have a curatorial team that we share with the City Palace Jaipur. So they would come and periodically manage our collections for us. We have gallery attendants, we have guides, and we have a smaller team compared to the City Palace, but we make do. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
I think we should also let Maureen take over. And if you still have questions, you have my contact details. Please feel free to drop me a text or a call or an email.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chandni. This has been a wonderful and really important session for us. And I'm sure we'll be in touch. So,
Absolutely.
all right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, Maureen, and thank you for allowing us this little more time to question and engage in conversation with Chandni. I'll hand it over to
Sure.
Sri
Hi.
Vishal. He's going to be doing the introductions.
Hi, Maureen.
Hi.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I am another program ambassador beside Kairavi, and I'm also a part of the studio. I'm Sri Vishal. Hi guys, this is our second lecture of the day. I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Maureen Certain, who is an architect with a doctorate in architecture, focuses her research, teaching, and practices on the relationship between territory, heritage, and water, particularly in fragile contexts impacted by global warming. She is currently an associate member of Toulouse Architectural Research Laboratory, engaging postdoctoral research, co-managing public contracts for remarkable heritage sites, and teaching architectural and urban design workshops at ENSA Toulouse. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Certain.
Thank you. Okay. Can I share the screen?
Yes. Or if you're not able to, or if you have any problem with the connection, you can send it to us and we can share it for you.
I think it should work.
Right.
On my side, the connection is good so far. Do you prefer me to send it to you?
Yeah, you can share it. And if you don't mind, you can send it to us.
Yeah, I'll share it first. It's gonna be easier this way. Can you see my screen?
Oh yeah, we can see it.
Okay, cool. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me today. I'm very pleased to know that you are working on Jaigarh and in a broader way on Jaipur. So I'll talk about the traditional water structure of Jaipur, that were the main focus of my PhD, as it was said in the introduction. Because the aim of my research was to assess the potential of the structure to become alternatives towards a more sustainable water management. So for this talk, that should last 30-40 minutes, I propose to you the following schedule. I'll look at the history of Jaipur, but through the prism of water, and there will probably be some connection to things that you have seen yesterday or this morning. And then I'll present my research methodology, which was a little particular, and also that was based a lot on cartography, and I've seen that this is one of the themes you are working on regarding Jaigarh. Also, since it's your whole subject this semester, I'll talk about the example of Jaigarh Fort and what I've learned about it through my PhD. And finally, I'll also present my opinion and my findings on the reactivation and heritage labelization of these structures. And I'll also I'll try to give you 4 key points that I've learned regarding this structure and that are, to me, very interesting to keep in mind as architects. And then afterwards, there will be a little time for discussion for any question you may have. Can you hear me well? Let me know.
Yes, it's
if the
perfectly
sound
good.
is
Yeah.
okay. Good. So as Jaipur was founded in 1727 by Maharaja Jai Singh II. Was built on a square plan. All of that is very known. But the thing is, it was a connection with Amer, so the kingdom's former stronghold to the north. I don't know if you can see my pointer though, right here. And on this territory, there were already several obstacles to human settlement, especially the drought and also the very long period without rain, the proximity with the desert. All of that is a very big problem to take into account when you want to build a whole new city. So to accommodate its 150,000 inhabitants, the city master plan provided for an entire water infrastructure based on the collection of monsoon, principally by the topography, with very large artificial lakes and the communication of smaller scale structure. So this is what I refer to when I said traditional water structure. I'm not using the term system when I'm talking about one structure, and I'll use the term system when I'll talk about the connection of all the structure. And all of these are forming a territorial system, and it's defining the contour of the new city. So there is a huge variety of structures that exist, but the main ones are lakes and their dams, the wells, of course, also the step wells, the baulis. There's also the small enclosed reservoir, the tanks, and the tankas, and also their canals, the nalas. There's also the stepped reservoirs, the kuns, and also there is a less known system, but that has a very big importance in the whole territorial infrastructure, which is the low stone wall, the boons. All of that was providing water for several decades. It was a very functioning territorial system, but all of that totally shift starting from the British colonization in 1757. The paradigm totally shifted from the traditional royally funded systems that were built by community and also managed by the users. When we noticed the arrival of new technologies like electric wells and sewers and taps, and also when all of the managing systems shifted from community to sectoral governments to state governance. And with the independence in 1947, these changes only continued and became even more pronounced in the 60s. And the major shift regarding water and the place of traditional water structure in Rajasthan generally, but particularly in Jaipur, happened in the 60s with the Green Revolution, which profoundly transformed the agriculture. And of course, the irrigation. And all of that led to the implementation of mega hydraulic project, all of them based on large-scale redirection of water, resulting in general and in the overexploitation of the groundwater. In the addition of these major changes in the 60s, the 90s brought unprecedented urbanization in Jaipur. The city's population quickly reached 2 million inhabitants, and with this growth, the water supply's difficulty became very critical, and the public water supply system struggled to keep up with the demand. So this is where private tube wells really proliferated, and also this is where the black market of water really started and sprang up. So to meet the growing demand, a major water project was launched in the 2000s, involving the construction of an artificial lake and a dam and a treatment plant, which together form the Bisalpur complex. The water from Bisalpur, so some 450 million liters per day, is transported to Jaipur via a 120-kilometer long pipeline. Even though with the current population of almost 4 million, this reserve is now in danger of no longer being able to meet the demand, especially as the principal resource for the Bisalpur complex is the monsoon. So it can totally depend on the years and on the quality of the monsoon the lake receive. So all factors combined, Jaipur is now facing a growing and urgent situation of water stress. And in general, climate change and in particular changes in the frequency and intensity of precipitation are having a very big and increasing impact on the territories. And this is calling into question the sustainability of our relationship with water, even more so in the cities. And one of the stronger indicator of that situation is the phenomenon of water scarcity. The water scarcity can be defined as a temporary or long-term situation in which the quantity of water runs out, or its poor quality limits its use. And this situation is globally exacerbated in semi-arid or arid regions. So in the case of Jaipur, all the characteristics are there, and the everyday culture that was progressively built and that has conceived the whole territory was also progressively abundant since colonization right up to not the present day, but not so far ago. It all came from the British ignorance towards the structure and what they were useful for, and the community role they were also having, except of bringing the water. Also, the arrival of new technologies, as I said, the very harmful political decision of a large-scale project, and also the growing access to comfort systems, such as AC, such as taps and that kind of things. However, the modern improvement that happened in the past centuries and that were sold as the best solution for water management have kind of failed to sustain or become sustain the resource and to bring water to all. In 2022, the researchers of the Center for Ecology and Hydrology in Wallingford in the UK, they have put together a new indicator called the Water Poverty Index, whose measurement is actually and currently the more faithful, because there's a lot of characteristics and criteria in it. So it's the more faithful to reality on the ground. And according to this report, Rajasthan and especially Jaipur, with an index between 48 and 56, falls into the fifth category of the indicator, and falls into a category called very difficult situation regarding water. So we see how urgent that question might become in the future. So my work on this subject, it only started in 2019, mainly through in situ work, thanks to which I was able to produce a number of resources, architectural surveys, of course, which provide technical knowledge of the structure and permitted to do some diagnosis on it. I also did a lot of photographic surveys to catch, of course, architectural details as well, but also the uses of these structures. Some of the structures are not in use anymore, but some of the traditional structures are still used in some part of Jaipur. And to see how these uses have evolved and become more contemporary in some places is very interesting. Also, this on-site period help to evaluate the contemporary role of heritage, as you recently did when you visited the fort of Jaigarh, depending on the day and the district, and also the social class, and also the time of the year. So there's a lot of parameters that are interesting to understand how it works. And I had planned to continue this on-site method in Jaipur the whole time of my PhD. But as you know, COVID made that impossible at some point. So I had to develop a second methodology for working at a distance, and we called it later the EC2. So for that, I started to develop a methodology based on cartography on maps, with the redrawing of the whole details of the city on the base of the assembly of an aerial photograph. So the base map of which you can see on the screen. It took a lot of time, but it was very salutary actually, because the cartography, if you do it layer by layer, theme by theme, actually permits you to keep a foot on site, and also to discover it in its depth and its complexity. So it's always a tool I'm a big fan of. Like, it also helps to be able to understand layer by layer, and then to see the connection and the complexity of some layers over them and over the top of others. So here you have the only example of the built fabric of the city, but imagine doing that for the vegetation. And you can, I did it on the metropolitan scale, but like on the site scale, the vegetation, the cycle of water, and road infrastructure, and all the layers you can add up really permits you to get like a very, very complex understanding of a site, which is different from an on-site perspective where you receive all the information from your like five senses all right away. So I feel like these two ways of studying a site shouldn't be competing, but definitely completing. I also did that, and also did media monitoring. Because I was away, I had to like follow the evolution of some systems. I wanted to be a witness of the transformation of the system during the monsoon. And for that, traditional media really helped, but social media really helped too. You can't imagine how many people are tweeting and posting on Instagram about the traditional water structure, because there are beautiful backgrounds, of course, but this is definitely a way of tracking the evolution of some structures and get information on how people are perceiving the heritage as well. And then also I did digital surveys, the one with the IT tools like Google Street View and also Google Earth Profile, all the new tools and technologies we can use to get more insights on the sites we're studying. So part of that study was dedicating to assess the state of operation of the structure to understand if they were able or not to provide water and what kind of water and how many and how to how many people and what quantities and etc. and what qualities. So for that, I used Atlas composed of 4 scale. Firstly, the regional and urban scale. I used it to provide to understand the geographical characteristic, the political dynamics, economical and social facts as well. And all of that gave the context. And then came the micro watershed scale and the water structure scale. And right between finishing to get all the infos from the regional scale and the urban scale, my thesis directors and we realized 2 things. First, there is still hundreds of traditional water structure existing in Jaipur. If we consider not only the lakes and the Baolis that are probably the most known, but if you consider the whole system with even the low stone walls, the small tankas, and even the small wells, it represents hundreds and hundreds of structures still existing. Some of them very lost in the bushes and not even really known. So it was too much study even during a long period of thesis. And the second thing is that, of course, there's a territorial system. We know about it. I've showed you the maps of the whole planning infrastructure, but it is actually subdivided into smaller systems that are all organized along ridgeline of micro watersheds with either a lake or a fort at the center. So if you look closely, all the system then redivides and rework in a smaller system with fort or lakes in the middle. And that became very interesting. And that's how the corpus I worked on was composed. So I got to work on 7 micro watershed that are the most known and interesting ones. And 43 structure within them were studied in more details. And one of these watershed is Jaigarh watershed, of course, and it's a very interesting one because it's almost completely man-made watershed. Other watersheds are 90% based on the original topography, and they are only using the runoff of the hills. But Jaigarh is one of the most complex and the most transformed watershed. So it's located on the Haraveli Hills, as you know, at 150 meters above the Amer Palace. And it spans approximately, the fort spans approximately 3 kilometers in length and 1 kilometer in width. And as you have seen recently, the walls contain temples and halls and an absolutely stunning garden. But what I prefer in the fort, of course, are the water structure, and actually also outside the fort is the loop system. So the micro watershed is very stripped. It has an area of 2.4 square kilometers. And since the elevated position and the defensive meaning of the fort, a lake in the middle or any traditional way of managing the watershed was not possible. So this is where the loops came in, and the loop system are there to collect the water, while the fort is actually acting as one big reservoir to store and protect the water. And inside the fort, we have various other like smaller structure, one open tank, one cooned, and one closed tank, and also some canals. So the Nala system, it's designed to collect the runoff water from the hills to supply the fort. It's constructed of a stone rubble and lime mortar. It has a varying width, ranging from 1.3 meter in some point to 3 meters in other areas. And it represents a water collection surface of 17,000 square meters. So it's like one of the biggest water surface collection of the whole territorial system, even though you have like Mansagar as comparison, that is also a very, very big watershed. This one is also like quite impressive. So the collection capacity of the loops is of 8,500 cubic meters, which represent a big quantity. And to do so, the walls of the loops forming the edge of the channels, sometimes they are asymmetrical, lower on the uphill side to better receive the water, and also their thickness is very important. Most of them are like 50 centimeters wide, and this is designed to withstand the force of water flowing down the slopes during the monsoon, because you have to imagine the force of that amount of water running down the loops. To ensure the quality of water, the initial rains are used to clean the loop system. They are not collected in the fort, and they are discharged through metal grates with outlets. So you have like one picture on the top that show you one of these outlets. So all this elaborate circuit actually begins 3.5 kilometers south of the fort, with one first very large loop that is here. That leads to an aqueduct that is here. That aqueduct, you have the picture here. You probably have seen it already, but it's interesting to see how, from a distance again, how all of these loops and aqueducts are like enchaining, how it forms like a very complex circuit. The aqueduct is 120 meter long conduit. It has a sloping system as well, and it's supported by external reinforcement to prevent from the soil moving, and also to support the rapidity of the water going through it. And at this point, it then goes through a second loop and then a third one. All of that growing towards the fort, and also all of that sloping towards the fort progressively. And at this point, the Nala that finishes the loop circuit passes through the fort's fortification wall via underground canal before extending inside the fort and then filling the different structure that we see in it. The Nala system was unmaintained for some years, which explained the degradation of some of the coatings that I have noticed, and you probably have noticed too. There's, of course, the marks that are left by the monsoon every year, and also the the presence of plastic waste, which is a problem today regarding the collection of water. However, it remains, like from my calculation, it remains a very, very efficient system because it has very minimal loss, and the design, the dimension, the placing of the loop system make in top of the hills even make it one of the more efficient system in the whole Jaipur, especially as with that method of loop circuit, you take out the problem of erosion, running of dirt and branches, and you only collect almost fresh water right up. So even though it's not perfectly working today, this is still one of the most efficient system I've been looking at. Then when you go inside, you have firstly one tank, which is a regular reservoir of a very, very large size. Same again, one of the most impressive structure in Jaipur. So approximately 120 per 45 meter with a rounded corner in the southern courtyard of the fort. It's actually an unfinished reservoir with the bottom scattered with stone paved slopes. We don't actually know, I think, from what I've been studying, we don't know why this tank was not completely finished. But it reaches a maximum depth of 9.3 meters and has an average depth of 6 meters over the rest of the extent. So this explains why the water capacity collection of this tank is so massive. So the surface corresponds to 5,400 square meters, thanks to which the whole tank can collect 32,400 cubic meters, which represent years and years of water for a whole population living in the fort. It appears that it has not undergone any major restoration or maintenance since its construction, and probably because it was not properly finished. And same as for the loops, it has been unmaintained for several years. And also, since it was not finished for its original purpose, it doesn't completely fulfill the objective it was made for today. But without any human intervention, it still recharge pretty well every monsoon, thanks to the loops and thanks to the direct precipitation in it. It still stores very large volumes of water. We have seen it in the past year being not completely filled, absolutely not, but at least at half of its capacity, which is quite impressive. And it also experienced very low losses since there's no infiltration and since the vegetation is currently limiting the evaporation. So maybe there's one hint here of how to reduce evaporation sometimes. And then the second branch of the canal, the underground canal, is going into one closed tank, also designed to hold a large volume of water for the population in times of war and siege, water that was aimed for human consumption and human usage. It has also colossal dimension. This is one of the biggest community tank in the city, 48 meters long by 42 meters with a depth of 12 meters. Storage capacity is 23,124 cubic meters. So, and you've seen during comparing the scale here, you're seeing the scale of one human and the dimension of the tank. something that is kind of like difficult to notice when you're actually like walking around it or like looking at it from one side. It's very hard to like imagine how big the whole fort is and how big the whole water structure and water infrastructure are. And right next to it is the Kund. So it's accessible through a gate and a staircase that lead to the main flight of steps. I don't know if you got the chance to go down there. This flight of steps has a very significant footprint on the Kund and on its actual storage capacity. But it had to be that way to support the pressure of water the Kund is storing, but also to support the pressure of the water collected by the tank against which the Kund is backed. So this is actually a complicated trick that they had to do here. With its dimension of 16 per 15 meters and a depth of 11 meters, the Kund has a very good storage capacity actually, but compared to the rest of the structure of the fort, it has a very tiny capacity. And so it makes it capable of collecting 1,285 cubic meter. So it's from far the smallest structure of the fort. But this is also due to the water of the Kund being primarily intended for religious and temple activities. So it limited the requirements. So whether you're at Jaigarh Fort in general or in Jaipur, traditional water structure obviously represent an individual, a singular heritage to be preserved. I don't think there's any discussion today on that. However, I think the very singular value and climatic intelligence of these structures lies in the fact that they work in a watershed, micro watershed system, and in a territorial system. And this dynamic consideration of heritage can actually allows us to consider their future in the line of how they were thought and in the line of how they are helping the whole territory. In my thesis, I proposed some ideas regarding heritage labelization and reactivation, depending on the structures and depending on their location, etc. And so all the conclusion at the structure scale in the thesis were made on case-by-case basis, depending on the state of operation, the location, the water capacity, the heritage value. So there's no actual global solution regarding the structure themselves. It's too particular to define by the site it takes place on, that you can't like actually give a general rule on what to do with them. It depends. Some of them are too far abandoned or maintain or transform to be of any use regarding water and only have like a memorial value. Some of them are very far located from the touristy place and are actually bringing water to some population. So it won't be interesting for them to become heritage circuits. It depends. But regarding the bigger scales, there's actually some interesting conclusion. The highlighted issues are the valorization of traditional water structure as key to understanding the specific characteristic of the territory and the urgency of water-related challenge. There's nowhere else in Jaipur to see how water is important and how water is currently a challenge than in the water structure. looking at the different lakes through the months and years, you are going to be able to see exactly how the water situation is going. You're going to be able to see if the monsoon were good, if the pollution are rising or not. Same in other structure as well. They are the best indicators of what is going on in the water table or in the general territory regarding water. So they are very like important hints regarding the general health of the territory, I would say. Also, they are the aim is the revelation of the significance of their existence in the city's history. Like very often before, people were talking about Jaipur regarding its grid plan and its relation to astronomy and its relation to architecture regarding the building facades and that kind of thing. And all of that, of course, had a very important impact on the plan for its foundation. But if you actually look at the main grid, the logic of positioning the city south of Amer, connecting through the fortification, the connection also to the ancient Aminisha Nala on the west and that kind of thing, you discover how water played maybe the major role regarding the size, the positioning, and many dimensions regarding the city. So all of that you can transmit through the traditional water structure. But their major potential is to become emblematic support for new sustainable water practices. According to all my calculation on these 7 micro watersheds, even though we were to completely reactivate all the structure and all the systems they form, we would not even meet 5% of the current water requirement for the entire metropolises. The demand has become so big that the traditional water structures can't do anything for it anymore. But on the other hand, locally reactivating these structures could bring precious volumes to some homes in needs. And so it can also be the emblems, the symbols of different practices. It can launch some wills, some political wills, maybe some funding, so it can be the basis of something new starting regarding the management of water, and it can be a really good ground for merging contemporary techniques and the traditional one. So overall, by reactivating, what we now mean by reactivating the water structure is just not like restoring it and putting it back to its original use, but more making it new symbols and new supports for sustainable water management. The aim is to preserve their memorial value, of course, to ensure the transmission of their functional dimension, even though they are not functioning sometimes. It is still very important to understand how they were functioning and what they are, how they are related to the soil, to the monsoon, what they were designed for, what role they used to play in the bigger structure. So you have to replace in the bigger context every time. And they are also they have a lot of potential to promote associated knowledge with them, like the construction, the architecture, the approach to water management. This is actually their current best value. It's not the building by itself, but all that it conveys. So for us, as well as being for the architects, as well as being fascinating for their special qualities, especially some fortification going with the dams and the lakes, and also the Baulis, that celebration of the void that we all like. Traditional water structure have a few global lessons to teach us, I think. The first being the importance of making the micro watershed as a scale for project. Since the hydrological cycle of region is made up of multiple and local circuit that are very specific to the watershed, it is the reference you need to think in terms of biodiversity and also community problems and issues and needs. In the case of Jaipur, the municipality represent 500 square kilometers and 4 million inhabitants. So this is the scale of political will. This is the scale of economic budgets, maybe, but the micro watershed area proves to be a more realistic working scale as for like architecture and planning. And also it helps us to draw the boundaries of a project. It's always complicated as architects to know where to stop or where to start exactly on a site. Most of the time what we do is that we take the limits, like the administrative limits of a site, and this is what practice make us do most of the time. But if it's possible, like taking into account the watershed area and the micro watershed limits makes it a more logic of affordable special continuity. And it also allows us to position the actions to be taken either in a curative posture, what we do most of the time, but also in a preventive posture with the regard to upstream and downstream relationship. When you're doing that, you have to think of what you're going to influence above and under you, basically. And this kind of help us to have like a better thinking on the project we're doing. Of course, it's more respectful to the hydrological rhythm, and it frees itself from the fictitious administrative boundaries. It's not only related to human needs and issues too. If you're thinking in terms of micro watersheds, you're thinking in terms of fauna and flora as well. The second lesson that is interesting regarding the traditional water structure is that when water becomes the common thread, it becomes necessary to bring to the table a multitude of generally compartmentalized layers. And in the case of Jaipur, sector-based water management has over a decade led to the development of a very, very complex governance that is far removed from the realities of the local population, with also kind of failing to tackle the problems of agricultural overconsumption and generalized pollution. So placing water at the heart of the project, the stakeholders concerned with the physical role of water, so that can be technical, economic, ecosystemic, and those concerned with the more cultural role of water, that can be religion, tourism, or planning like us. All of these actors are there to build a shared vision based on individual compromises, but in favor of the whole project. So this can also be a good trick to make people talk. And in the context of the like galloping urbanization and modernization in India in general, but Jaipur being no exception. And we know that the development is kind of governed by economic and technical land issues, like in most of the place in the world, honestly, but it's also very based on the zoning of land use plan. And this relationship with the land place it as an inert medium, just like as a blank page. And it's particularly damaging to the territory because it implies later very big hydraulic infrastructure to be built for the management of drinking water, wastewater, rainwater, all of these becoming like a very complex machinery. Giving water a very significant place in a project makes you think in depth. It's not a question on how you're going to plan on the soil, but more like how you're going to plan with the soil. You have to not only consider the surface you are like projecting on, but also like the depth of it, the dimension of it. And it makes your thinking suddenly like 4D, if I may say. And it becomes very interesting. And also this is where our love for the void and the speciality it creates can be very interesting. And it has, of course, tons of great properties concerning the temperature and the shades and all of that kind of thing. So it can also be interesting to consider designing with the soil. And the last big lessons, and that is now very trendy, but is accepting and making the most of hazard. So it's the question of resilience. It's a word we are more and more hearing because of the climate change. But in fact, when we see the traditional water structure of Jaipur, we see that making the most of hazard, making the most of a complicated territory was already something that population did a long time ago, way before it became a very big trend. And this is a great example of making scarcity abundance and transforming what is not supposedly accessible to like plenty. So according to the scientific prediction, maximum temperatures and average rainfall are set to rise significantly from now to like 2015. And Jaipur has already seen that, have already been witnessing that because over the past 2 decades, floods and drought have been more frequent and severe. And the strong relationship with the element and rhythm can be seen as subject for project. It's a very strong opportunity for me, I think, to support that shift from a logic of protection from the drought, protection from the floodings, to one of making the most of. And I think it's possible in a semi-arid region like Jaipur to imagine water as a co-producer of the architecture. So that's definitely something that the traditional water structure I approve of. I thank you for your attention. Without going into details, I'm displaying here a selection of major work on these issues. Probably some of them you have already seen for anyone that wish to delve deeper into that subject. And now we can discuss all of this if you want to give me some feedbacks or ask me any questions.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I was really taken by your idea of the micro watershed becoming a scale for both governance and management. But before I take over on that topic, I'll leave it to the students to engage with you more in line with their own interests for the studio. Guys, it's key for you.
Your presentation was very insightful with the graphics and like layering the certain aspects of watersheds and the whole narrative. I've got one question. So I'm looking at the thematics of cartography and machining the landscape. So we see several water systems being integrated within the landscape of Amer and Jaipur. That includes all the dams and water harvesting systems of forts, palaces, and gardens. Uh, could you chronologically picturize and situate the nature of landscape within the context of Amer and Jaipur and its environs before these man-made water systems were established? So, for example, you had presented and you had showed about how uh, the Man Talav Lake and uh, the Sagar Talav Lake being constructed as a dam, and then we could see a direct picture that from the Van Talab Lake that looks at the Jaigarh Fort and then the Sagar Talab Lake. So I'm just wondering, before these dams were built, and what was the landscape like? And through our last three lectures and our visits to Jaipur, we see a lot of building additions that is being done for Jaipur and Jaigarh with respect to like political lenses. So I was just wondering how the landscape would have been before these things being built. Were there like any lands of marshy lands or yeah, just that.
I was not there. So all I'm saying is what I've been finding in the books and what I've discovered in my research. And also I'm not an historian, so that is only what I've collected. But there were already structures, a lot of structures in and around Amer. The oldest structures, the water structures we know, the oldest one are in Amer and dates back from the 10th century. And we know that there were already population living in the desertic areas around Amer, doing like some tradings and some religious activities to like separate very far away temples. And we know that there were some structure there that might not exist anymore. So we know that the land was kind of partially transformed in some very specific tiny villages or like places. But mainly we know that it was forest and desert. If you look, the biggest transformation is actually where the Talcator Lake is. You probably have seen that in the cartography and in the books. We know that it was water ponds, forests, and all of that were transformed and formed the Talcator Lake, progressively shaping its form of a square and then diminishing its scale. So regarding the general landscape, we know it had potential, but the interesting thing, I think, is that all the discourse we have are saying that there were like some ponds, some natural lakes, some places with water. We know that the Amanisha Nala, before it becomes the river with all the concrete that it is today, it was like a non-perennial river, pairing after the monsoon from the hills. All of the water they had was temporary. Like all of the discourse I've seen is showing that some places add water at some times depending on the monsoon, and it was a very varying landscape. I think the landscape used to change a lot every month and in every year depending on the monsoon before. And what Jaipur did is it stabilized a landscape. The water structure made it a more permanent landscape through the creation of like permanent water spots. So it kind of like freezed what they've seen through the years and through the spots they've seen the shape they've discovered that were naturally happening. I think the plan was based on that and kind of like freeze it and then make it better and bigger and more royal, of course.
Right. Thank you. That actually answered a lot of my question. The water landscape being dynamic and how Amer and Jaipur stabilized by creating permanent water structures.
Anyone else? Maureen, maybe then I will ask you a question.
Okay.
Just, there is, of course, the rulers, the royal family, who themselves would have been instrumental in the entire kind of water system and putting it in the. When you looked at other watersheds, did you find other scales of administration that perhaps weren't directly linked to royalty, but to the princely scale of doing work? But were there other scales of building these structures, and was there a kind of network that you could see between scales? Just wanted to ask you also in terms of who owns traditionally, how these structures were owned and maintained and operated. Were you able to kind of get a sense of what operates at which scale?
Yeah, so the planning was territorial, and then depending on whose part of the royal family was this into, or whose part of the population it was destined to, there were some links. So we know that there is link, for example, between the Mauda Lake and the Mansogur Lake. So we know that their underground water table is kind of linked, and the volumes that they have are also balancing depending on the years. And it's not actually as true as it was before because of all the transformation that Mansagar has gone. But some of the structure on a smaller scale will also communicate in. We also have the proof that many of the wells around the Mansagar Lake were filled through the Mansagar Lake. So basically the Mansagar was filling up the water table, which was like making the level of in the private well rise. So there was like that very interesting and complicated also infrastructure underground. So there's what we can see, what is built, and all of that is more distant to human and the sky because of the monsoon. And there's also what is happening under and what is linked to the underground water. And there was a big distinction between the water from the sky and the water from the ground. So the Wakar and Palar water, depending on its purity. So that was also a scale. So you have like the territory, you have the micro watershed, you have either regarding the water from the sky or the water from the underground. And then the fourth big scale is the one of management, of course. Most of the structure were funded by the royals or the powerfuls. Even the population could ask for the creation of a tanka, for the creation of wells to the powerful or the royals. And then it was built by the community, and then it was maintained by the users. So the whole community, the whole, so it depends if it was district or, but usually one type of job district was building one structure. Even though it was like far from where they live, it was like the whole community was building one, and then it was maintained by the users.
Right.
So it was like a very shared thing. And there was one very interesting thing is how the decisions were made afterwards. So usually what was done before is that it was someone from the lower class that was chosen to make the decision. So someone from the lower caste were chosen to make the decision because that person was defined as the one with the less interest in what the structure would become and in what water would be used. So that person had a maximum power over the water because it was the most like how do you say it? Like the most non-biased person. And that person had a word over even like the powerful of the community, or like the rich in the community, or the higher class in the community. That person was making the decision and taking the infos from the royals and from the scientists to know what to do and when to close, when to open, how to clean, when to clean. All of that was done by that chosen person. So this is also very interesting because it shows how water was placed over any like political, economical. It was known already that it is more important than human like dispute.
But
It
yes,
was too important to be wasted, and that system shows it.
but in terms of the maintenance and the looking after by let's say locals or so on, does that then kind of overlay with kind of institutional networks of temples that are able to raise funding, or economics just for maintenance? Is there that relationship? We find that sometimes in Gujarat, but I was just wondering whether you found any kind of institutional structure that might then kind of overlay, not necessarily always, but from
In the past, yes. In the past, yes.
I mean traditionally, yes, in the past.
Yeah, in the past, yeah, there were structure, some kind of like neighborhoods, like groups that were formed to take care of the wells, for examples. And we also have examples of like religion groups and temples taking care of baulis and kuns. We also have examples of some groups of farmers around Vantalab taking care of the low walls, the low stone walls, the boons. We have example of that as well. I think it depended on how important it was for the community and how necessary it was. Like, for example, I've seen all around Jaipur, there's still like some traces of ancient boons in the slopes of the hills, but it's not maintained in most parts except in Ventalab. And since Ventalab area and north area is still very agricultural and still very pastoral, they are still maintained, and there's still people talking about it and talking about how their grandparents used to come and repair the stone walls and used to do it before every monsoon and that kind of thing. The practice and the history is maintained there, and they had groups before. They say that they've seen people coming from other places come and help them repair their wall, because it was like the group of the pastoral and agricultural people doing that. But today there's a lot of places where these have completely disappeared. And also I've met people that live like right by a Baoli or right by a very interesting kun and don't know that 3 streets behind them they have that. So it's very complicated to imagine a whole civilization, whole population living around water and like forming one to take care of it, and then now people just not knowing that they have that right by their house. So
Thank you, Maureen. Are there any more questions? Anybody else? Maureen, perhaps the students, sorry, yeah.
I think that's so much of questions for now. But Maureen, can we mail the questions if we get any doubts or anything? Can you mail it to you? And
Yeah, of course.
we,
I've put in my email on the presentation, so you
right.
can reach out if you have any questions or need some documents.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. We'll end for this session then. Thank you so much for this really interesting
Thank you for
presentation.
having me. It was a great pleasure and always a pleasure to keep in touch with CEPT.
We'll hold you to that and bother you even more through
My
this.
pleasure then. It works.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good luck for the rest of the semester, and please let me know what the project are becoming at the end. I'd be happy to see what you all are planning for the Jaigarh Fort.
We look forward to that, Maureen. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.